Okay, so in the next subject, what we're going to start talking about here is risk management, okay? And when we're talking about risk, what we're saying is it's the chance of something that will happen that will actually have an impact on our objectives. Okay, so the chance that something could occur, something could go wrong, something go right, whatever it happens to be, that's going to have some sort of impact on our operations and necessitate some sort of response from us. Okay, so our risk management, to put in sort of business speak, it is the guiding principles that an organisation uses in relation to its management of risk and the detail of how the principles will operate in practice. In other words, in order to manage it, what are the risks themselves, what are the things we're going to do, and how will that operate in the real world? In other words, what's going to happen, what are we going to do about it? Okay, so the first thing we start to think about is it's really a process that allows organisations to identify risks. Okay, so the first part of risk management is really about identifying what can go wrong. We then get to the point of thinking about, that's the situation. If the situation occurs, what are the dimensions of the risk? So what were the likelihood it was going to happen? So, do we think it's going to happen? And if it does happen, how bad is it? And then once we've done that, we start to look at our ability to actually deal with that problem. Okay, so now that we know it could happen, we know how bad it would be, what steps can we take to prevent it from happening? And then if it does occur, how can we limit the impact or control it once it does happen? So what's our plan going to be? So in order for it, in order to survive, we need to strike a good balance between the amount of risk taken that we want and the amount of return that we can get. Because in business, we're thinking about risk versus return. Okay, so we do need to risk some things in order to try and get a potential return on that. We need to put money into a company, but we want to make sure the company then makes money so we get our money back. And we need to think about, well, what is the likelihood of that? What could go wrong and stop that from happening? And that's why we start getting into risk management. So the first step that we really start doing is establishing the context, okay? The first thing we talk about is the context of risk, okay? So, what is the activity? What is it that we're doing? And then we start to critically examine the elements that go into that, okay? And what's already in place. What is the business we have in place? Is there anything in place? What methods or techniques have they already come up with? What are the strategies that we're employing at the moment? That's what we're starting to talk about there. Okay, so if you're going into a new business or a small business, you might actually get there and find that there's next to nothing in place. Basically, people have been using luck as a risk management tool, or it's very informal. It's, look, we'll just deal with it when it goes wrong, rather than having a sort of formalized approach to how they deal with it. Okay, so in that case, when you start to deal with that, or you move past the, we're a small outfit and now we need to grow, we need to probably start to deal with various stakeholders in the organisation, like the managers, etc., and try and get an understanding of what's in place. Okay, particularly if you're coming to a new business, you need to find out very quickly what have you guys got in place, what is it that you as a manager need to develop for them or to manage for them. And a good risk management plan, what it's really designed to do is provide clear guidance on how various parts of the organisation can identify and manage risks. Okay, manage the risks they face and how that might impact the business. All right, so part of the process is being able to speak to people, find out what's going on, find out what are the dangers that we face. Remembering that no one person has all the answers. In fact, the answers come from a collection of dealing with people. So we need to spend the time to really understand and investigate, what's in place. What do we think we're going to need? What is it that we're doing here? What are the dangers with that? All right. So once we've gone past the initial context, what we start to do is we start to go through the process of analysing the risks a little bit clearer. And the first one is that it comes into stages. All right, and the first stage that we start to look at is investigative. Okay, so we need to investigate the risk. We need to think about, well, what could go wrong in this business? What would be the source of the risk? What sort of risks are there, etc. Then we move to stage 2, and what we're doing in stage 2 is now we know what they are, we need to assess them. Tell me more about them. We've identified what the problem could be. Well, what's going to cause it? How's it going to be caused? Who would be involved? How would that go? Okay, so we make an initial assessment. How bad is it? Now we'd start to do the analysis. Okay, once we've analysed the risk, we can start to move through stage 4, which is manage it. And then once we've gone through employing the management strategies, we can start to get down to, okay, now we just monitor it. Okay, the monitoring stage. In other words, when will we know it's going to go wrong and how we're going to do that? So we'll go into those stages in a fair bit of detail. But remember, so the first bit is set the context, understand what the nature of the activities are that you're doing, how big is your business, how many people are involved, what sort of things are they doing, it's that really big picture. And then we start to move through the process of investigating, right? Well, what does that mean? Where could risks come from? Assess and analyze, okay, so how bad could they be? What would make them happen? What would be the trigger? How can we prevent it? How big, how bad, how often? The management, okay, so how are we going to make sure that this isn't going to go wrong and what things can we put in place? Policies, procedures, training, guidance, etc. And the last bit's really going to be about monitoring. So how do we keep an eye on it to see whether it's going wrong? And then if it is starting to go wrong, put in place the things that need to go in place to prevent further things happening. Okay, so that just gives you a bit of an idea of what we're going to be covering over the next little while. And this is the principles that underpin our risk management. All right, cool. All right. So what we start to talk about now is we, obviously we've had a bit of an overview on where we're going. Now we need to start coming up with a bit of a scope. Okay, so some sort of scoping document. What we're talking about with scope is we're talking about what's going to be included in our risk management strategy and the extent to which it's, sort of addressed and dealt with. Okay, so how much are we going to look at? Where are we going to look at it, and in what sort of detail? Okay, so the scope of a risk management strategy is really about, we need to think about what are the risk tolerances of the business and the activity of the risk profile. So in other words, we're really trying to work out, what do we want to look at? We need to start to look at the past history. Okay, so what have we been doing at that business, or what have we been doing that activity? What's the past history been like? Okay, so if we're undertaking activity, have there been incidences in the past? Have there been dangers in the past? Do we know of any other sort of things that match up that give us an indication that there could be something to be concerned about? Because that's going to obviously give us material to work with straight away. We might also start to think about what's the current level of knowledge in the organisation. So when we're thinking about the organisation, we need to think about the people in it. So what do those people know about risk management, particularly at a more senior level? Okay, so a lot of people that have gone through small business, a lot of the time they might not necessarily have had a whole lot of look at that. The business could be growing and expanding, and the people that started with it, well, it's grown beyond their understanding. So we need to start thinking, what are the existing knowledge levels around the organisation? I need to also think about what are my available resources. Okay, so if I'm going to start getting a bit of scope and starting to look at what we're going to do in that company to try and deal with risk, I need to think, well, what resources do I have to help me do that? Do I have time? Do I have money? Do I have computer infrastructure? Do I have old data? Do I have reports? What information is around that I can get a hold of? And I also need to think about the external factors. Okay, because remembering that the business or the activity isn't just necessarily what I'm doing, but also need to think about what's happening around us. Okay, so I might run a perfectly safe business, but if next door is a massive construction site, that's going to start to impact on me straight away. If there's new things that have come up built around my business, well, that's going to massively change what's happening within the business as well. Okay, so they're things I need to think about. So when I'm doing my scoping, I need to think about, well, if we're going to start examining risk management in our business, are we looking at the whole business? Are we looking at a certain department of the business? What sort of depth are we looking at? How much time and money and effort do we have to spend on it as far as resources? What is the knowledge level of the people that, is this an introduction? Or do we have some fairly sophisticated people around that can really get into some depth with this? Now we need to look around, is there past history or past data around that's going to help us build that scope that we can say, well, look, over the last 12 months, here's some information we're at least starting with. And also, once again, just that little look about, well, what's going on around us, what's happening. All right, so that's some of the considerations while we're going through the initial scoping. The next one that we need to think about as we go past there is we need to start now thinking about people. Okay, so we start to talk about stakeholders, and you'll hear this word quite a lot. Okay, when we start to talk about stakeholders, we need to start thinking about, well, who are they to our organisation? Now, a stakeholder is anyone who can affect or is affected by our activity. Okay, and we need to think about what are their needs, what are their objectives, internal and external parties, so not just people in our business, but also people that come to our business. So if I'm a retail outlet, it might be my suppliers who need to come in once a week and bring in all the supply. It might also be my customers who need to come into the space and shop for product. Now, both of those have totally different needs and totally different ways they're going to operate with us. And I need to think about, well, how do they do it and how does that work to make sure that I'm considering, how their impact might affect my risk management process. Okay, so anyone who can affect or is affected by, and that's internal or external. Okay, so we'll go into stakeholders a little bit more. Various different people I can think about is, my workers. Okay, they're the most obvious group that I'm going to have. I need to also think about the business owners. Okay, so they have different concerns. I have shareholders. Okay, that's a different group as well, and I might also have a reference group. Okay, and that actually might be made up of multiple different smaller people within my business. And that's just internal. So when I'm saying reference group internally, that might be a collection of people in my business or attached to my business or customers, whoever, people that I can talk to get a really good idea of what's happening within the business. All right, so that's the first bit. That's the first part I'm looking at. This is all about what's in here right now that I can deal with and starting to think about building my scope and building all the details about my risk assessment process and how I'm going to manage it. And that's all that's inside. Great, okay. Okay, so we've looked at what was internal to my business and what sort of people might be there as a bunch of different stakeholders. Thinking about my staff, thinking about people within the business, the owners, and all those other various people, your management, etc. And you can divide them down into different groups as well between different types of staff, different functions of the organisation, even different times and different locations. All right, but now I start to think about, well, what's external? Okay, and there's quite a long list of those. And the first thing we think about is government. Now, when I'm talking about government, I can be looking at, on a big picture, so a federal level. Okay, so what are the bigger laws and stuff that come into my business and what do I need to be mindful of? Down to a state level, which is, things like, police matters, workplace health and safety, etc. And it might even be a local level. Okay, so what is my local council? What are the local regulations? What registrations and taxes do I need to pay on that level? Okay, all these things can come into it as well. Depending on my business, if there's a lot of noise made, the local council will send out the council rangers and they'll be the people I deal with. That's not a federal thing, that's a local thing. So I need to think about, who are they, where are they? I need to think about community members. Okay, depending on my business, I might have an impact on the local community. Particularly if I was running a construction site, yes, I'm building this house, but that's affecting everybody on the street. So that becomes a community issue because there's a workplace, there's trucks, there's stuff everywhere. That's going to affect more than just me, obviously. That's going to affect the entire street. If I build a petrol station on a suburban street, that affects everybody. Little things like that, I'm thinking about the community around me. I need to also think about my customers and suppliers. Okay, so what needs do they have? When do they come, etc. And how my suppliers are going to get there. Okay, I need to think about also going a little bit past that. I might have the media that I might be involved with. Okay, and I might need to really start thinking about how that works. Okay, and look, it's really basic things that come out in strange ways. So prime example is the other night in my local suburb, we have a supermarket that's been built. And it was the last addition to the neighbourhood. And what that means is we've got this great big beautiful supermarket, but it was the last real building that went in. And all the local side streets were never designed with that in mind. So we had a particularly wet, rainy night the other night, and we had one of the large trucks had gone down to drop everything at the supermarket and then had to navigate tight suburban streets to get a massive truck out. And it was pouring rain. And as the trucks come up the hill, the truck realised that they couldn't actually make it because the roads really aren't designed for that, particularly bad conditions. The truck broke down across 3 lanes and just stopped the entire community. So what that meant was, if we think in a risk term, I have a supplier who needs to be able to move a truck down a street. The truck has now broken. The truck has now prevented everyone else moving down that street just because it was just never designed that way. And now the community members are all upset because they can see the big brand of the company down the side of that truck, and it ended up on all the local media and social media pages, all these nice photos. So if you're the company, you're thinking, here is our brand being beautifully broadcast across everywhere, disadvantaging our local customers, annoying the local community members. It's now in the media, and it's all based on my supplier need of being able to ship a truck to come to my business to supply it. So, and then the government gets involved because the truck gets a big fine. Okay, so by something going wrong in your business, it can have multiple layers of effect, and I need to think about all those different types of people and how we're going to deal with problems as they arise. Okay, the next thing I start to think about is I need to just, now I've done that, is just review what we have in place. Okay, so I'm going to look at the policy context. So what have we got, once again, already in place? What's the context of what we're doing? What's the environment we're going into, or what factors are we dealing with? And that's when we start to look at a lot of the external factors. So right about now that we've looked at what we have, our policies and platforms, okay, so what policy doc do we have, what procedures do we have? But right about now is when we start to move into doing our STEEP analysis. Okay, so do a quick STEEP analysis straight away on the business, looking at all the different external factors. So once again, looking at our social, technological, we need to think about, what's the ecological, etc. So start going through, and then to add to this, we might also look at the legal and ethical, or the legal grounds as well. Okay, are there any particular things there? We might also add policy to it if we want, etc. We can really sort of round it out. And you'd also start to look at doing a bit of a quick SWOT as well, so to look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, and understand, particularly either around the business or our ability to carry out the audit itself. Okay, so once again, we want to know what's happening in the neighbourhood around us, which is really STEEP, so the local area and the bigger area. Our SWOT, which is really about our capacity to deal with risk. What are we working with that's going to be able to help us? What's going to work against us? What weaknesses do we have? So information we might not have. What are the threats if we don't get it wrong? Don't get this thing right, what's going to happen? And what are the opportunities? So when I'm doing my risk profile, what things might I find that I can take advantage of or help me out here? Okay, so once again, carrying out your SWOT, carrying out your STEEP, looking at policy and procedure platforms, think about any other legal issues that you know are on your radar, and having a look at the external factors or the external stakeholders there, your internal stakeholders, and you should be starting to get ready to pretty much move into the document itself. All right, cool.